Welcome back to Hidden Universe. Tonight, I want to take you into one of the strangest mysteries buried in America's forgotten past. The story of a village that once existed, full of life, laughter, work, and dreams. And then, one day, was gone. Not abandoned in the way ghost towns are left behind. Not destroyed like the places nature reclaims after floods or fire, but gone in a way that defies reason. A village that was there, and then WASN, single quotes, T. Somewhere deep in the American wilderness. Small communities rose and fell with the centuries. Settlers built their homes near rivers. Coal miners dug their lives into the earth. Loggers carved paths through the forest. And usually, when such places died, they left bones, wooden frames of churches, cemeteries with tilted stones. Roads overgrown but still faintly visible if you knew where to look. But this one was different. This village seemed to leave no bones, no scars, no skeletons of history. Only whispers, only rumors, only a name that once was, and then was erased. The first whispers come from faded county records, where a name appears once or twice, then stops. An entry of births, a census note, then nothing. As though the families never moved, never migrated, but simply ceased. Local folklore began to swirl around the silence. Some said the entire village was evacuated in secret by the government, carted away in the middle of the night, for reasons never explained. Others claimed the ground itself took them a sinkhole, a collapse, an opening of the earth that swallowed houses whole, leaving nothing behind but flattened dirt and tree roots. But the strangest part, no geological evidence was ever recorded. No sinkhole, no disaster, just absence. Hikers sometimes tell stories of walking through dense woods and suddenly feeling a shift, as if the forest around them was not entirely right. They stumble upon clearings where the air feels heavier, where birds do not sing. Some report finding strange patterns of stones half buried under moss. Shapes too deliberate to be natural, as if once forming foundations of homes. But when they try to map it, to mark it, they find nothing on paper. Compasses falter. GPS glitches. It is as though the land itself rejects being remembered. Old letters from nearby towns mention the neighbors up the road. But the road today leads nowhere. Families living only a few miles away recalled visiting the market in the little settlement. But when asked as adults, many shrugged and say maybe they dreamed it. Maybe it was something else. As though even memory was slipping through their fingers. And yet, you and I know, places don't just vanish. Roads don't evaporate. Villages don't erase themselves. So what happened here? Some researchers believe the entire community may have been relocated, forced to leave after a secret military discovery. Whispers of uranium buried deep beneath the soil made officials panic. Rather than explain, rather than spark hysteria, they erased the place, bulldozed the remnants, removed the signs, changed the maps, and to cover their trail, they made sure no evidence remained. But that doesn't explain the eerie silence that remains in the woods. The strange sensation people describe, the overwhelming feeling that they are being watched when standing on ground that once held houses. Others say it is older than government. Secrets. Some say the land itself was cursed. That the native tribes warned settlers not to build their pate. That the soil was hungry. That it would take back whatever tried to rest on it. And perhaps the settlers ignored the warnings, building anyway, until the day the land decided it was done tolerating them. And so it took the homes, the people, the animals, everything, leaving nothing but whispers for future generations to stumble upon. But then, there is one last theory, a chilling one, that the village did not vanish here on Earth at all. That one night, under a strange sky, something came down, lights, sounds, a force beyond human comprehension, and by morning, the entire place was gone, lifted, taken, removed from this plane. Perhaps they were chosen. Perhaps they were prey. Perhaps Perhaps they now exist in some other place, some other world, living still, but unable to return. Even today, the story remains unsolved. The maps no longer carry the name. The land looks as though no one ever lived there. But the silence? Oh, the silence tells a different story. For silence that deep, that heavy, only exists where something once thrived. Something that left behind more than just absence. And so, when you walk in the forests of America, when you drive the forgotten back roads, remember this. Sometimes, a missing house is just decay. Sometimes an abandoned barn is just time. But sometimes, an entire village can disappear, leaving behind nothing but the uneasy chill in the air. And the question that will haunt you long after you've left, where did they all go? Because somewhere out there, a village once lived, and now, it does not. For decades, stories continued to drift like smoke around campfires, whispered by those who lived in nearby towns. One tale comes from a hunter in the 1920s. He claimed he stumbled across a clearing where the grass grew in perfect lines, like it had been trimmed by hands that no longer existed. In the middle of it, he swore he saw a single lantern, rusted but upright, still standing as though waiting for its owner to return. He carried it back, showed it to others, but the moment it left the forest, it crumbled into dust. Nothing remained but flakes of metal and soot on his hands. He never hunted there again. Another account, from a postal worker in the 1940s, tells of being assigned to deliver a package to an address that no longer appeared on any official map. He thought it must be a mistake, a clerical error, until he followed the old road that seemed to curve where no road should be. At the end, he saw smoke curling from chimneys, faint figures moving between homes. But when he blinked, when he truly looked again, the village was gone. Only trees. Only silence. He quit his route a week later and never explained fully why. Folklore only deepened with time. Some said the people of the village were still there, just out of phase with us, trapped between dimensions, visible only in flashes of perception. Children, they said, were more likely to see it. Several parents swore their sons and daughters. Spoke of the other children in the woods, names no one recognized, games no one else could play. When pressed, the children would always point to the same patch of forest. But when adults searched, they found nothing but dirt, pine, and shadows. The strangest story, however, came from a man in the 1970s who went camping with friends near the area. On the second night, he awoke to the sound of music, faint, haunting, like fiddles and voices carried by the wind. He followed it, pushing deeper into the woods, until he saw firelight flickering through the trees. He swore he found himself on the edge of a town square, alive with people dancing, laughing, eating as though at a festival. But when he stepped forward, when his foot crossed into the light, it was gone. No fire, no voices, just empty trees. He returned pale, shaken, and refused to ever speak of it again. To this day, researchers argue, was this a simple case of a town dying and being forgotten? Or something far more unsettling? Ghost towns leave skeletons, evidence, bones of wood and stone. But this feels different, almost intentional, as if the place itself wanted to be erased. And the land remembers, not through ruins, but through unease. Hikers report headaches, sudden nosebleeds, dizziness in that region. Dogs refuse to enter certain parts of the forest. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain. Even compasses spin, as if north itself has been denied. The U.S. has many ghost towns, but a vanished one. That is something else entirely. Something that bends history. Something that whispers. Maybe the village never left us at all. Maybe we left them as the years passed. The legend of the vanished village only grew darker. What unsettled investigators most wasn't what they found, but what they DN single quotes. No census records, no land deeds, no property transfers. It was as though the entire population had simply been erased from the paperwork of history. Skeptics argued it must have been a clerical oversight. But how does a whole community, families, children, generations, disappear from every single archive? Some researchers began calling it the Blackout Village, a name born from the eerie lack of information and the strange reports of electrical blackouts that plagued anyone who tried to study it. In the early 1980s, a local historical society attempted to compile every shred of evidence. They gathered photographs, maps, and testimonies in a small office. But just weeks later, the building mysteriously caught fire in the dead of night. The cause was listed as faulty wiring. Convenient, too convenient. Every document, every photograph, every scrap of data about the village gone in the flames. Only fragments of memory remained, scattered like ash in the wind, but there were survivors. Not of the fire, of the village itself. At least, that's what some claimed. One man, now elderly, swore that he was born there. He said his parents pulled him out as a child before the night everything ended. When pressed about what that night was, he grew pale, shaking. All he could say was, the light came from the ground, and then, nothing was the same. What did he mean? Light from the ground? Researchers speculated it could have been a sinkhole, maybe volcanic gases. Others whispered of something far stranger, an underground facility, a government experiment, a weapon test that went terribly wrong. And then came the satellite photographs. In the early 2000s, when high-resolution satellite imagery became accessible, curious internet sleuths tried to pinpoint where the village once stood. What they discovered shocked them. A patch of forest, in the right location, where the trees seemed wrong. Perfectly uniform, almost artificial, as though they had been planted all at once to hide something beneath. Even stranger, on some images, faint square outlines could be seen beneath the tree canopy, like the ghosts of streets, foundations, homes. On newer images, the squares vanished, covered over, almost like something or someone was actively erasing them. To this day, no official record confirms the existence of the village, and yet, too many stories, too many encounters, too many whispers echo its reality, and that's the unnerving part. Because if a village could be erased from maps, from memory, from reality itself, what else might already be gone, hidden from us in plain sight? When a mystery runs this deep, the human mind demands an explanation. And for this village, 4 major theories have risen from the fog of speculation, each one more unsettling than the last. Theory 1. The government experiment. Some claim the village was sacrificed for science. During the Cold War, the United States conducted countless classified experiments, from nuclear tests in the desert to chemical dispersal over unsuspecting towns. Could this village have been ground zero for something unthinkable? The story goes that an underground facility existed nearby, masked as farmland, where scientists were testing an experimental energy source. If something had gone wrong, if radiation or unstable forces were unleashed, it could explain why the land was sealed off, and why every trace of the village was erased. Witnesses who spoke of a light from the ground suddenly sound chillingly credible under this theory. Theory 2. The alien encounter. Others believe the village wasn't destroyed, it was taken. Stories of missing time, abductions, and mysterious lights in the sky have long haunted this part of the country. What if the entire community was subject to a mass abduction event? A chilling thought. Not individuals, not families, but an entire population relocated in one night. Believers point to the silence of official records as proof, arguing that governments might cover up such an incident to avoid mass panic. After all, how do you explain an entire town vanishing into the stars? Theory 3. The cursed land. Folklorists dig even deeper. They trace the land back centuries, to indigenous legends that warned of sacred ground where no one should settle. Some say the land was tied to rituals, to burial grounds, or to a force not meant to be disturbed. The curse theory suggests that those who built the village ignored these warnings. At first, they thrived, but eventually, the land itself exacted a price. The reports of unnatural silence, the strange lights, and the forest that grew unnaturally fast all point to a power beyond human comprehension. Theory 4. Mass disappearance by choice. The most controversial theory suggests the villagers themselves vanished willingly. Imagine a community that discovered something extraordinary, something that set them apart from the world, a new faith, a hidden technology, or a doorway into another realm. What if they simply chose to leave this reality behind? The phrase whispered by one supposed survivor, "The light came from the ground," could describe a portal, a gateway, to somewhere else. They didn't vanish by accident. They stepped through and never looked back. Each theory holds its weight, and each leaves behind more questions than answers. Was it science, the supernatural, forces from the sky, or a choice made in silence? The lack of evidence is, in itself, evidence of something extraordinary, and maybe that's the most terrifying truth. Not knowing which of these theories, if any, explains the void where an entire village once lived. If history teaches us anything, it's that silence often hides truth. And in this case, silence came not just from the vanished village itself, but also from those who lived on its borders. People who caught fleeting glimpses of the mystery before it disappeared entirely. The farmer's tale. One of the earliest accounts comes from a farmer who lived several miles away. He claimed that on the night the village vanished, his cattle became restless. Dogs howled without stopping, and the air grew unnaturally still, the kind of stillness that makes every hair on your arm stand up. Then, he described something impossible, a faint glow rising over the trees, as if the earth itself was radiating light. He didn't dare go closer, but by morning, when curiosity got the best of him, the road to the village was gone, not blocked, not broken, simply gone, as if nature had swallowed it overnight. The lost traveler years later. A hiker passing through the area reported stumbling onto ruins that shouldn't have been there. Crumbling foundations, half buried in moss, a well filled, not with water but with smooth stones. When he returned with others, the ruins were gone. Search teams scoured the coordinates he provided, but they found nothing but forest. To this day, some believe he crossed into a thin place, a pocket of reality, where the village briefly reappeared, before slipping away again. The child who remembered perhaps the most chilling story comes from a boy who spoke of memories that weren't his. He described living in a stone house with red curtains, playing in a yard surrounded by pine trees. His family swore they had never lived anywhere near such a place. And yet, when shown sketches of the vanished village, taken from century-old records, he pointed at a house and whispered, "That one. That's where I lived." No one could explain how he knew details of a town wiped from history. The whistle in the woods. Local hunters tell another tale. While walking the boundary where the village once stood, they heard faint music drifting through the trees. Not wind, not birds, but something like a whistle or a flute. They followed it deeper, until one hunter swore he saw figures moving between the shadows. But the closer they came, the quieter the sound grew, until it vanished completely. Some believe it was the villagers themselves, echoes of those who once lived there, replaying in fragments like a broken record caught between worlds. The last survivor. And then there's the account, whispered in bars and late-night radio shows, the supposed testimony of an old woman. She claimed to have been a girl in that village, the night it disappeared. According to her, she woke to the sound of her parents' voices, frantic, telling her to look at the light. She remembered the ground shaking, a humming in the air so deep it rattled her bones. Then nothing. When she awoke, she was lying miles away, in a forest, with no memory of how she got there. Her family, her neighbors, her entire life, gone. She spent the rest of her years in hiding, convinced that if she spoke too openly, they would come back for her too. Some testimonies can be dismissed as imagination, folklore, or fabrication. But when accounts repeat the same details, the light, the silence, the suddenness, they form a pattern, and patterns, in mysteries like this, are rarely coincidence. When people disappear, governments usually respond. Missing person reports are filed, search parties are launched, headlines explode. But with this village, the reaction was strangely quiet. Too quiet. The vanishing of records. Researchers who tried to piece together the story quickly hit a wall. Old maps that once marked the village, revised editions, removed it entirely, as though it had never existed. Census documents that should have listed its families. Missing pages, even property deeds, legal records that rarely vanish, showed strange gaps. It was as if the entire community had been erased, not just physically, but on paper too. The local authorities' response when journalists asked officials about the story decades later. The answers were vague. Some claimed the village was abandoned due to poverty. Others suggested disease wiped out its residents. But no official would provide proof. No graves, no relocation records. Nothing to explain how an entire population simply ceased to exist. The military connection. Whispers began to circulate about the military. Old locals remembered strange trucks on the roads weeks before the disappearance. Soldiers seen patrolling nearby forests. And on the very night the village was last confirmed, witnesses reported hearing what sounded like distant explosions. Muffled beneath the earth, could the government have conducted an experiment gone wrong? Or did they discover something in the village? Something they wanted to keep hidden? The restricted zone. What makes this theory even more unsettling is what followed. The land, where the village once stood, was fenced off. At first, people assumed it was private property. But later, reports revealed it was officially marked as a restricted research site. To this day, locals say anyone wandering too close is quickly warned off, sometimes even chased away by men in unmarked uniforms. If nothing unusual happened there, why guard it so carefully? The disappearing journalists, those who tried to dig deeper, often found themselves silenced. A reporter who began an expose on the village abruptly resigned, leaving no explanation. Another was said to have packed up and moved across the country overnight. Their articles, drafts, even personal notes, gone, like the village itself. Their work was swallowed by a void of missing information. Theories of a cover-up. Some argue this was all about control. If the village disappeared due to something unexplainable, extraterrestrial contact, dimensional collapse, or a natural phenomenon beyond science, officials might have decided it was safer to bury the truth than risk mass panic. Others believe the village stumbled onto something forbidden, an artifact, an energy source, maybe even a gateway. Whatever it was, the silence surrounding it suggests someone decided the world wasn't ready to know, and so, the cover-up becomes its own kind of evidence. Because when governments work this hard to erase a story, it usually means the story is very real. Whispers began to circulate among those who lived in the neighboring towns. Quiet voices that carried stories never written in any official report. Elders remembered strange nights in the weeks before the disappearance. Nights when an unnatural hum vibrated through the air, as though something massive and hidden hovered just above the treetops. Livestock grew restless. Dogs barked into the darkness, and more than one villager swore they saw triangular shadows passing across the stars. No one paid much attention at the time. Then, the village was gone. Others claimed they had seen unmarked trucks driving toward the community days before the event. The vehicles, dark and heavy, moved in convoys, covered in tarps, escorted by men who wore no insignia on their plain uniforms. They entered the area, but no one remembered seeing them leave. It was as though the earth itself had swallowed them whole. A more unsettling story came later, whispered in secret. Some believed that a woman had survived, stumbling into a nearby town weeks after the village had vanished. Her clothes were torn, her feet bare, her eyes filled with an empty terror. She would not say much, only repeating over and over, "They came from the sky, and we followed." Before long, strangers arrived to take her away, and she was never seen again. There was no record of her in any hospital, no report filed by local police. It was as though she had never existed at all. Theories began to take shape. Some thought the villagers had been taken. Others believed they had willingly gone with something or someone beyond human comprehension. A handful of researchers suggested the strangest possibility of all, that the entire community had slipped into a rift in time itself, not destroyed but shifted, continuing their lives in another layer of reality where we could no longer see them. If so, they might still be out there, walking through fields and streets identical to their own, searching endlessly for a way back. For those left behind, unease never faded. Children were warned never to wander too close to the village site. Farmers abandoned nearby land, fearful of working soil that seemed to hum faintly on quiet nights. Some families packed up and left altogether, unable to live so close to a place where the very fabric of reality had been torn open. The silence that settled over the village after its disappearance was not the kind of silence people were used to. It wasn't the quiet that comes after a long day, or the hush that lingers before a storm. This silence felt alive, heavy, and unnatural. When investigators first arrived at the site, they noted how quickly sounds seemed to die in the air. Their own footsteps were muffled. Even the wind that brushed against the trees seemed to be swallowed. The village wasn't simply gone. It was as though the earth had conspired to erase its memory. At first, the official explanation was one of abandonment. Authorities released carefully worded statements, suggesting that the residents had simply left, choosing to move on, perhaps due to economic hardship or disputes. But this explanation satisfied no one. The villagers had left food half prepared, on tables, personal belongings in their homes, clothing in closets, and tools in the fields. There was no sign of an orderly departure. It was as if life had paused mid-motion, and then vanished without reason. And then there were the strange details that the public didn't hear about for years. Search teams reported finding doors wide open, lanterns still lit, though no oil remained in the bases, and a scattering of animal tracks across the empty streets. Dogs barked for days at the edge of the forest, but refused to step foot closer to the center of the village. One officer swore he saw faint impressions in the soil, not quite footprints, not quite animal tracks, but something that suggested shapes unfamiliar to human understanding. His report was quickly buried. Rumors spread fast, especially in neighboring towns. Some claimed they saw strange lights in the sky the night before the village was last heard from. Others told of low hums that vibrated through the ground, as though machinery beneath the earth had suddenly stirred awake. There were whispers of shadows moving between the trees, long after the villagers had disappeared. And more than one search party reported hearing faint voices calling from nowhere. Voices they could not follow, voices that seemed to echo inside their skulls instead of across the air. With time, the story was shrouded in theories. Some believed it was an alien abduction on a scale rarely imagined, an entire community taken in one coordinated sweep. The evidence seemed to fit. The lights, the humming, the absence of any remains or signs of struggle. Others argued it was something far older, perhaps a supernatural force tied to the land itself. Indigenous stories, rarely spoken aloud, described the hungry place, a part of the forest where reality grew thin and lives could be swallowed without warning. Few outsiders took these legends seriously, at least not until the village disappeared. Still, there were darker, more unsettling theories. Some locals suspected government involvement. They spoke of unmarked vehicles seen near the area weeks before the disappearance. Men in suits asking questions, surveying the land. Could the entire population have been relocated under some classified program? If so, why leave everything behind in such a rush? Why not erase the evidence more carefully? And what of the strange radiation levels that surveyors claimed to detect in the soil years later, levels that never should have existed in a remote, quiet community? The truth was tangled, and every thread led to more confusion. But the most unnerving detail came not from the site itself, but from a single diary found, buried beneath the floorboards of one of the homes. The handwriting belonged to a young woman of the village, and in the final entries, her words grew erratic. She described nights filled with restless dreams, shadows at her window, and a strange buzzing in her ears that grew louder with each passing day. Her last words, scrawled in a hand barely legible, read, "They are closer now. The stars are falling into the trees. We are not alone tonight." That diary was never released to the public. Those who saw it claimed it disappeared into government archives, sealed and forgotten. But whispers of its contents spread like wildfire, adding fuel to the growing legend. Some even claimed the diary was a hoax, a story planted to distract from the truth. Yet no matter how skeptics tried to dismiss it, the mystery clung stubbornly to the story, like a shadow that refused to fade. Years passed, and the abandoned site grew over with vines and weeds. The buildings decayed, roofs caved in, walls crumbled, until eventually the village was almost indistinguishable from the forest surrounding it. But even then, travelers avoided it. Hunters claimed their dogs whined and refused to cross the boundary, where the village once thrived. Hikers reported losing track of time near the ruins, sometimes emerging from the woods hours or even days later than they should have, with no memory of where the time had gone. And then there were the disappearances. Small at first, a hunter who never returned, a tourist who wandered too far, a researcher who went missing while documenting the remains, always near the same place, always without a trace. The authorities chalked it up to accidents, people lost in the woods, but locals knew better. They whispered that the village was still hungry, that whatever had taken the people once had not finished its work. It was in the late 1990s when the strangest discovery was made. A group of paranormal investigators, armed with cameras and recording equipment, entered the site determined to prove or debunk the legend once and for all. For the first 2 days, they found nothing unusual, just ruins, silence, and the occasional creak of wood in the wind. But on the third night, one of their cameras picked up something chilling. A faint figure, translucent and shimmering, moved across the empty street. It wasn't clear, not fully, but the shape resembled a child. The figure paused, looked directly toward the camera, and then faded into nothingness. The footage circulated briefly before vanishing from the public eye. Some claimed it was confiscated, others believed it was destroyed, but the investigators themselves swore to their graves that it had been real. Stories like this piled up, layering the legend until it became impossible to separate fact from fiction. And yet, the fear it instilled was real. Generations grew up with warnings to stay away from the site. Those who ignored the warnings often returned with haunted eyes and fragmented memories. Some claimed they heard voices calling their names in the night. Others spoke of waking up in unfamiliar places within the forest, unable to recall how they got there. A few never returned at all. The strangest testimony came from a truck driver, who swore he saw a group of figures standing on the road near the site one foggy night. He thought they were people, villagers maybe, lost or disoriented. But when he slowed his truck and rolled down the window, he saw their faces, or rather the lack of them. Blank, pale, featureless forms stared back at him in the glow of his headlights. He slammed the accelerator and never drove that road again. His story was dismissed as exhaustion or hallucination, but the fear in his voice when he told it was undeniable. By the time modern investigators began revisiting the mystery, with new technology, drones, thermal cameras, advanced sensors, the site had already developed a reputation that made most reluctant to stay long. Their instruments often malfunctioned near the ruins. Batteries drained inexplicably. GPS signals warped, showing them in places miles from where they actually stood. Some even recorded faint electromagnetic pulses that spiked at random intervals, as though something invisible lingered in the air, waiting. The village that vanished became more than a story. It became a warning, a scar on the landscape, and a riddle that resisted every attempt at solving. And perhaps that is why it still haunts the imagination today. Because in a world that prides itself on explanations, on logic and science, here was a case where none of it seemed to apply. A community had disappeared, and all that remained was silence, shadow, and questions that may never be answered. Asterisk, when all the official explanations fall apart, what's left are theories. Strange, unsettling, otherworldly theories that try to fill the silence left behind. The vanished village has inspired dozens of them, some supernatural, some scientific, and some so bizarre they blur the line between reality and nightmare. The alien abduction theory, perhaps the most popular explanation, is that the entire village was taken, not by force of nature, but by forces beyond this world. UFO sightings were reported in the region for decades. Farmers spoke of lights hovering above fields, moving silently and unnaturally fast. If extraterrestrials were observing Earth, what would they want more than a test sample? And what better test subject than an isolated village, far from prying eyes? Some ufologists believe the villagers were abducted together, lifted into massive crafts in a single night. Others suggest that people were experimented on slowly over time until, one day, they simply never returned. It's a chilling thought that they may still be alive, somewhere far away, wondering if anyone remembers them. The time slip theory, another theory, is that the village didn't disappear. It slipped through time, or even into another dimension. Reports of time slips, moments when people vanish for hours or days and return with missing memories, have been documented around the world. If such a phenomenon can swallow one person, could it consume an entire village? Imagine waking up one morning to find yourself in a different century, or in a world that mirrors ours but isn't quite the same. If the villagers slipped into another dimension, perhaps they are still there, living their lives in a parallel version of reality. To them, we are the ones who disappeared. The cursed land theory folklore ties the village to ancient legends of cursed ground. Generations before, it was said a massacre took place on that land, staining it with restless energy. Locals whispered of spirits that lingered, waiting for vengeance. When the final generation settled there, the curse may have awakened. Some believe the villagers were claimed by the land itself, not killed, but absorbed into the very soil and trees, becoming part of the place forever. The mass possession theory, one of the eeriest possibilities, is spiritual possession. Some believe that a collective hysteria, perhaps caused by an otherworldly force, overtook the villagers. Neighbors reported odd behavior in the weeks before the vanishing. People staring at the sky for hours, murmuring in strange tongues, and gathering in silence at night. Could something have infiltrated their minds, guiding them to walk away together? Into the mountains, the forests, or perhaps into nothingness. The government experiment theory, for the more grounded skeptics, the theory shifts back to human involvement. What if the village was used for a secret experiment, biological, chemical, or even psychological? If the experiment went wrong, officials might have covered it up by erasing the community. This would explain the fenced-off land and missing records. But if true, it raises a chilling question. What exactly did they test? Each theory is more unsettling than the last, but all share one terrifying conclusion. Whatever happened to the village, it wasn't ordinary. As years passed, whispers of the vanished village refused to fade, though the land was fenced off and officials insisted nothing was there. Locals still reported strange encounters, sightings that suggested the story wasn't finished. Strange lights at night. Travelers spoke of glowing orbs hovering where the village once stood. The lights moved deliberately, as though searching. Some described them as lantern-like, others as mechanical, like metallic spheres drifting soundlessly across the fields. Whenever someone tried to approach, the lights would vanish into the forest. Echoes of voices on quiet nights. Hikers reported hearing the faint hum of conversation, men, women, and children, as though an unseen community was still alive, carrying on with their routines. No bodies, no structures, only voices carried by the wind. Some claimed they could even make out laughter and the sound of footsteps. The boy who wandered too close. One account tells of a teenage boy who wandered near the restricted land in the late 1980s. He later told his family he saw a whole town lit by lanterns, where there should have been only empty grass. But when adults returned with him, the vision was gone. Only silence and trees remained. The boy swore until his last day that he had seen the missing village, alive and waiting, hidden just beyond our reality. The woman on the road. Truck drivers along the highway nearby often reported a lone woman walking the roadside at night, dressed in outdated clothing, her face pale and blank. When offered help, she would vanish before their eyes. Some believe she was one of the villagers, still searching for a way back. The chilling conclusion in the end: no single theory can fully explain the disappearance. Perhaps it was aliens. Perhaps time itself swallowed them whole. Or perhaps the government knows more than it dares admit. What is certain is this: hundreds of lives simply vanished from the map. No graves, no goodbyes, just absence. And maybe that's why the legend refuses to die. Because deep down, we fear that if it happened once, it could happen again. To another village, to another town, maybe even to us. If you've stayed with me through this unsettling mystery, ask yourself this: what do you believe happened to the vanished village? And before you go, don't vanish yourself. Hit subscribe to join me here in Hidden Universe, because the next story may be even stranger than this one.